Okay, just a little bit of housekeeping. I'm actually going to put up a video that Ed and I did. It's one of our usual talks. It's kind of interesting. It's on J6. Um, I'm going to start to put up a video that is subscriber only and just see how that works. And I generally kind of thought that we would keep the calls subscriber only and my audio diary subscriber only, but I think I'm just going to try this and see how it works. I kind of like the idea of putting up videos like for the outside world. I'll just see how it works, and I might release it to everyone else later. The other thing is that I have been working on Vegas, and I have thought through this quite a bit. And what I'm going to do is basically have offer some hotels for everyone at a price that I'm now comfortable with. I had to really look around. It's very difficult to book large number of rooms, and basically kind of handle that through us, and then basically announce the actual locations as we get closer to the event, probably a few days before. I'll also give you guys my cell phone number, and we'll probably create a Telegram chat group just specifically for the event. So hopefully no one will, there'll be no issues that way. Yeah, I just think this is the best way. We want to kind of, I mean, obviously you can, if you want to go to the event, you can buy a ticket, and, if your cousin lives there or whatever, obviously you can do what you want. It's totally fine. But it would be very helpful to centralize everything so we can drive people to and fro, because we're going to actually rent a large car, and that will so we actually it will be better for you, and it will just allow us to pick everyone up. No one has to, we don't have like 30 people Ubering or something like that, which is just really a kind of waste of money and time and stuff like that. So anyway, I'm going to put that up later tonight. And so anyway, I have a couple of things I'm going to post later tonight, but let me think if there's any other housekeeping that needs to be done. I don't think so.
Hey, Richard, I might have, sorry if I missed this earlier.
Sure.
Ed's course on for this weekend?
This was the other thing I wanted to talk about. So, two things. Ed is also busy again this weekend. Secondly, due to the lack of interest, we've decided to kind of rethink the course and just start it late. And so, yeah, much as with Schopenhauer and Hegel, mine had a huge amount of demand. His had little. I think I know why, actually, and it's not exactly personal. I think a lot of it is that, like, the way that Ed designed the course is that it was, he was going to lecture on these subjects that he's written about. And I think a lot of people might have understandably and maybe correctly assumed that, like, you could get that for free somewhere else. Whereas with mine, with Nietzsche and with Mark Brauman and my course, it's basically like, we are going to read this text with you, and you're going to learn from it. And it's more of a rabbinical way of doing teaching, to be honest. And that's also why I kept the class size to a limit. I probably could have sold another 10 tickets or something, 10 registrations. And so we had this idea. So Ed has finished up a new book that called Eugenics. And it is, well, it will probably use a different title than that, but you can imagine what the book is about. And that will come out at the end of the year, maybe early next year. He's also working on a book on religion and evolution, and he's looking into a lot of ancient cultures, and he's also working on the Bible. And so we kind of came up with this idea of doing a course where it's Ed reading the Bible and obviously taking his perspective on that. So my idea is basically that we offer a refund for the people who signed up, or you could just start on this new course. And, again, I think I've kind of learned something from this whole thing, but that I need to write something to that effect to people who registered. But yeah, that is what has happened.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. I'm actually interested. I want to do the Bible reading course myself. So I think it will be overall good. But anyway, so that's it for housekeeping. What do you guys think? Is there something pressing you want to talk about, or J6 hearings? That's kind of been talked to death. Anything? We have a good crowd and these get listened to. I'll just start talking about the J6 if you want. I think there's kind of been an interesting development. I think it's as cynical as we might want to be. I think they're clearly working. And my AirPods are now working for whatever reason. Maybe they're out of power or something. Anyway, I think the J6 is clearly working. And that poll of 60% of people think that Trump should be indicted is pretty damning and definitive. And I think there's kind of something else. There's almost like a counter action to that, which is that I think MAGA has taken on such a life of its own that it doesn't actually need Trump anymore. And yes, it was a personality cult, but I think it pre-existed Trump, and it can live without Trump. And it can be even powerful without Trump. And maybe if Trump is just so badly damaged by this, it needs to discard Trump. And I was just thinking this, did you guys take a look at this Texas agenda by the GOP, their official platform of the largest red state in the country, one of the largest and wealthiest states in the country? It is really remarkable. And there's a liberal freak out over it, but I kind of understand why there's a liberal freak out. So they have launched in there that's pretty predictable. And I guess being opposed to abortion is also pretty predictable. But it goes well beyond that. So they want to create a electoral college for the state of Texas, so that much like our electoral college and our Senate system gives preference to land over population, you could say, this would do that. So they will basically offer their rural voters a more power in electing statewide offices like governor, and I guess the state senate, things like that. They'll be using a electoral college system. They mentioned secession. So they want to have a referendum in 2023 on whether Texas should reconstitute itself as a republic. And they also had some just funny things in there, like they want stricter laws against corporations that are like woke corporations that are promoting gay rights and CRT and all the stuff that Texas can like use state anti-monopoly power. And then the other thing was these little things that you can easily overlook, but maybe are telling. There were things in there like we want stricter laws against doxing and swatting. So, I mean, how many people are really exposed to doxing or swatting? This seems to be something directed at like libs of TikTok and Tim Pool or something. So basically, the Texas law is like a big live stream or something like it's coming from a different place than a lot of this other stuff. So it's a grab bag of like sovereign citizen type stuff, you know, Texas as a republic, not a state, type stuff, which has been around for a while, but it's always been treated as rather silly and you know, not serious really. You know, it's like I grew up in Texas. I mean, we would joke about like, oh, well, we might just decide to become a republic again or something like that. And it's a grab bag of like the new right that's emerging online, plus the sovereign citizen stuff, plus the latest conservative outrage. And I was just kind of thinking about this, like, you know, Trump was the best aspects of Trump, and why I like Trump, and I imagine a lot of you did, was he had a Pat Buchanan quality to him. He had a Ross Perot quality to him. Even it was a kind of secular nationalism. Let's reindustrialize. Let's stop getting, you know, screwed over by the rest of the world. You know, America first. Like there was a healthy and very normal and kind of, I don't know, mid-century or mid to late century quality about him. I mean, you can find these, you know, these interviews of Trump on Larry King from like the 80s or early 90s or something, where he's talking about all these issues. Like he's talking about Japan, and we need to make electronics here, and we should stop paying all this money to all these, you know, NATO and things like that. Like we should get something out of it. Like it's all stuff that's totally reasonable and secular. He was pro-choice. He was not interested in the religious right, and then just adopted it later on. And so with a lot of the kind of like Texas stuff, like their platform, I could imagine him opposing those things or thinking that they're wrong or off base or whatever. And I think it's an example of like MAGA doesn't need Trump at the end of the day. And he can get, he could go to jail for all of the J6 shenanigans, and it won't really matter. There's going to be a kind of renewed and in many ways radical and in many ways unhinged MAGA that will outlast him. And I don't know. I mean, I think we've kind of entered a new realm, and certainly certainly like there's a lot of turning back the clock on issues that I think everyone assumed were basically settled. Abortion being a classic one, but even like the gay issue, like well beyond, you know, trans children and things like that. And so I just think we're in a kind of remarkable state with these guys. And also, I would just say, like, I feel far more alienated from this type of MAGA than I do from, you know, like the Trump of 2016 that never worked out or something. But they're going very hardcore. I don't think that they're going to go hardcore really on immigration issues. They'll go hardcore on like defending the border or whatever. That's a typical boilerplate thing for the right. I don't think they're going to go hardcore on a lot of the things that were, you know, like the edgy Trump supporter cared about. This agenda didn't mention affirmative action. It did mention allowing people to, without a law degree, to take the bar exam, and allowing other things like it was basically like suggesting that everyone become a lawyer. Like, you don't need credentials to be a professional. I guess you could even become a doctor. You could sell people, ivermectin, and also sue, acting pro se effectively, like sue women for having abortions. I mean, it was wacky as hell. Not wacky on a lot of the things that Trump really talked about in 2016. So anyway, I just find it kind of fascinating, and I also would say that I'm, speaking personally, I think they're going wacky and radical in all the wrong directions. But anyway, just a thought. What do you guys think?
Is that, I mean, do you think that that's as good a definition of Trumpism as anything else, like wacky and radical in all the wrong directions?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a kind of earlier version of Trumpism. I think there's probably like a Trumpism that should be rediscovered, but which I think is now kind of like totally impossible. And that is the Trump of the late 80s and 90s. This Trump that is a clearly kind of right wing on some level, but not a culture war issue, but a kind of Perot nationalism. I mean, Buchanan obviously Buchanan gave the speech that defined the culture war, but Buchanan at his most, like interesting, I would say, and his most like appealing to the right type of people, it wasn't the culture war, the abortion stuff, or the Catholicism. It was definitely much more the like, we need to build a wall, we need to control the immigration, we need to rethink foreign policy, no history, we're going to become a republic again, we need to, maintain our industries, globalism's failed, all that kind of stuff. I mean, I think we are now like well past all of these issues to the point where like, we're not living, it's not like 1986 anymore. And so I feel like a lot of this is just water under the bridge. But I would say that a lot of it remains to me quite appealing and defensible. And I think there is like a version of Trump that you could discover that is like that. I remember Trump was a member of the Reform Party, which came directly out of Perot. And, I don't know. I mean, there's something to be said for the fact that in 2000, he was suggesting that he run for president with Oprah as his VP. Now, obviously, that is cringe as hell. But if you are perhaps overly charitable to him, you see that like he wanted to unite the country. He did not want to become the world's most divisive, poisonous force in the universe. He wanted to kind of be like, hey, let's get some outsiders here in Washington and let's run this correct, and let's really communicate with the people, and there was, and reform the government and so on. I mean, there's something I find appealing. There's something very normal and healthy about that. Obviously, a lot, I'm speaking for myself here, but a lot of us were just wildly attracted to Trump in 2016. We thought, all of these super edgy, outlandish, taboo issues we could now bring to the fore. I certainly have failed at making like the meaning of Trumpism the things I care about. Now, whether I should be blamed or whether that was a dream to begin with is another question. But there's no doubt that like I don't define Trumpism really at all at this point. And there is going to be a Trumpism without Trump. And I think we're getting a glimpse of it. Like the degree to which the GOP is, activated just can't be underestimated. I've told this story, and maybe some of you guys weren't here yet when I told the story, but so I was meeting, it was actually someone from this group was with me at the time, and I was meeting this woman down in Kalispell. So I live in Whitefish, which is a resort town. it's Montana, but it is a ski resort, so it has a froofy element. There are, multimillionaires who have massive houses on the lake and so on like that. Kalispell is also nice, but it's more of a working class town. And so anyway, I was driving. I drove down to Kalispell, and it was actually on Good Friday, so it was in April. And there were these cars that I remember. This car that was like revving its engine, and it had an American flag and then a pirate flag, like a skull and crossbones flag, and it was revving its engine and like honking its horn. I was like, "What in the hell is this? Like, is this is a Good Friday celebration? Like, what what am I seeing here?" And then I was walking around, and you see all these cars like doing like, what is it, donuts, or like spin, like before they were like slamming on the brakes while punching the accelerator. So they were like spinning their tires, like wearing down their rubber tires, and smoke going up in the air before the light turned green. And it was just nuts. And I remember I was with this friend. I was like, oh my God, this is like a Trump thing. And I saw this one car that had a Confederate flag and a Trump flag in Montana. It's like, makes no sense, basically. But anyway, I remember seeing these like kind of, I don't know, wine mom type women. And I was like, is this a Trump rally? And she turned to me, she was like, they do this every Friday. Every Friday they're out. And I was like, they're not even observing like Good Friday. Like, they're just out and about. They probably don't even know it's Good Friday. Then after dinner, I was walking back, and this smaller car drove up to me, and the guy got out of his car and he said, "Fuck Trump." Oh no, excuse me. He says, "Fuck Biden, fuck the liberals." And then he got in his car and drove off. And I was like, wow, I have come so far. Like 5 years ago, I was saying "Hail Trump" at a rally, and I was all in, and so on. And then I lived to be like denounced by the movement. Like the old revolutionaries who Stalin like had killed and so on. It was just a very strange feeling. And so anyway, I was thinking, I don't think this guy knew who I was, but I think he just went after me because I was wearing like a black leather jacket and jeans. I think he probably thought he was like, this guy's a hipster. But it was just one of the most remarkable things. And I don't know. I just, when I saw that, I was like, wow, the level of commitment and obsession just can't be underestimated. This is real.
So do you see, and I admit this is the first I've heard about that Texas platform you mentioned, but I mean, do you see a connection between like those Trump people who are out on the street just for the sake of it? They're so jacked up with this energy, got to do something. Do you see a connection between that energy, those people, and that Texas platform? And I mean, it's an honest question. I don't know what the answer is. I don't really have a sense of where these people are coming from or what exactly is going on inside the Republican Party. But I mean, do you think that's when you do see a kind of a connection between that energy and that platform? Do you think that like the people in that group are really jacked up about the kinds of things that were in that Texas platform? Is that really where that energy is now?
Well, yes and no. It's the same people. Now, if you talked to the guy in Montana and asked, like, what do you think? What do you want? What do you think about Texas secession? What do you think about, what were some of the other wackier ones, like an electoral college? Or what do you think? What is your opinion on abortion? They might not be on board with all that stuff, but it is the same type of people. And remember, it's an agenda. It's a platform. I mean, platforms aren't really enacted. They're simply there to kind of unify the party. And I think this was kind of like a debutante and a coming out party. It was like this is who we are, get used to it. This is, like, we are literally trying to do this stuff. And we want to allow anyone to become a lawyer so that they can sue women who have abortions. I mean, it's the same type of people and the same type of mentality, and they are definitely invigorated. And I think like the January 6th commission or committee is going to work on a lot of moderate types. It's obviously going to work on liberals, and but I think it will work on a lot of moderate types. But like, there is a large percentage of the population that doesn't care, and even if Trump is like humiliated or even sent to prison, like it just won't matter for them. They've moved on, and they're now focus. I mean, again, using this platform as one example, they don't need his approval or endorsement.
It's interesting because I mean, the one constant I've seen to Trumpism, and I understand you're saying that the platform is aspirational rather than a set of things that really will get done in any plausible scenario. Right. But I guess, yeah, my question was, does it really reflect the aspirations of those kinds of people? And I get it. The answer is sort of yes and no, but I guess I'm surprised. It is quite counterintuitive given all the things we've said about Trumpism in the past, that it would have reached the point where Trumpism really is completely viable without Trump, and his supporters wouldn't really care. Because it seems like if there was one thing that was consistent to Trumpism in the final years of his presidency, it's that it was a cult of personality. And
I know.
Yeah, if it's now really like, I mean, we're really in bizarro world now. If it's no longer a cult of personality, but now it actually does have some kind of substance to it, even if the substance is some kind of bizarre ectoplasm that I can't really explain very well.
Yeah, like it definitely was a cult of personality. I mean, remember, the GOP, the national GOP, did not have a platform in 2020. The national GOP stated that we support Donald Trump's America First agenda. I mean, just really remarkable. Like they were like beyond, like it was a pure cult in that sense. And it was obviously a cult with all these people who would hang on his every word. And the Q cult made him a religious figure. I mean, it was a cult of personality. That's very clear. But I don't know. It's almost, to use like a 20th century analogy, it's almost like Stalin dies and then the Bolsheviks come back or something. As opposed to the Soviet Union kind of settling in and becoming more conservative and, in the other sense of the word, and kind of reasonable in a way. Certainly more reasonable than it was under Lenin or Stalin. It's almost like the Bolsheviks came back or something. And I don't know. I just don't think, this is my sense of it. It's like, it's to underestimate them, to think that it's a mere cult of personality.
Because I'll admit, if you had asked me what Trumpism without Trump looked like, the best answer I might have come up with was something like DeSantis, which obviously is obviously it's a less interesting thing to talk about, if also much saner. But he seemed to really kind of fill the gap, at least, of a lot of the culture war or cultural and anti-elite signaling that Trump did. He's kind of covered those bases in the sense of doing a lot of social conservative stuff, and Trump covered that base too, but also this kind of anti-elitist, kind of rabble-rousing cultural stuff with the Disneyland stuff and the quote unquote anti-grooming stuff. And so that was my sense of more where it was going. And I've seen polls that have him doing quite well against Trump among Republicans. But stuff, there is this weird, at the same time, there is this weird energy out there that has more to do with, say, Q and with the anti-vax stuff than it does with any personality, let's say. And is that really going to sort of settle back down and be sort of absorbed or co-opted by something like DeSantis, or is it going to go into some bizarre new direction? I don't know the answer, obviously.
Right. I mean, DeSantis is aping Trump to a large degree, but he's also kind of Trump 2.0 as well, because he's done things, like Trump would often do this stuff. Like I remember even back in 2016, where this is a controversy that's long past, and I don't think it's even really that relevant anymore. But remember when I think it was Apple Computer refused to give the FBI like backdoor access, and there was this terrorist act in California, I believe. Do you remember this controversy?
Only vaguely.
Yeah, so there was a terrorist act in some kind of spree shooting or mass shooting in some extent, and there was this terrorist act, and then they said, oh, they used an iPhone, and so Apple should give them the backdoor access, and Apple kind of stood firm. They said, well, we know this is heinous, but we actually have this priority that we do protect the security of our users. Now, I think the whole thing became moot, and like the FBI got in the iPhone anyway or something, but it was a bunch of moral signaling basically. But I remember Trump was like, let's boycott the iPhone, and he just kind of ad hoc decided to start a boycott, which I think also had no effect. I mean, the whole thing is water under the bridge. But what I'm saying is he would do that, like go after companies, and there are probably even better examples of this. But DeSantis like playing hardball with Disney based on the Don't Say Gay bill, so-called, and a lot of like online energy about grooming and libs of TikTok and all that stuff. It's kind of a 2.0 thing. And I think DeSantis is, Trump was the creature from the internet, but I think DeSantis is maybe even more. DeSantis is definitely like taking his cues from the internet. And so I don't know. I mean, I think it's, yeah, I mean, the whole thing is just a complicated, matter. I think I do think he's kind of like the next thing to a large degree. And I think he's almost like taken things that were present in Trump and kind of accentuated them.
I think maybe this is Ross, new member, new caller. I think, actually, I just was thinking DeSantis is sort of Trump with a brain in a sense of what one person said. So he's a little more, well, he's actually more of a traditional politician, but I'm actually here from North Georgia. So my representative is Marjorie Taylor Greene. So
whoa.
So a little bit, I think she's the true Trump, well, 2.0, or maybe the heir to Trump, possibly. But I think the best one I saw on her was actually a clip that CNN. I know right where the Chick-fil-A is in Rome, Georgia, but actually she was campaigning there, waving her banner, but there was actually a veteran, a Republican. And he said, I'm a Ronald Reagan, Republican. And he said, he pointed and he said, you're a traitor. You're a traitor to this country for supporting Russia or for the lack of support of Ukraine. But that was a great moment there. Yeah. But anyway.
Interesting. What have you ever like been to a MTG rally or?
Well, that's something I was thinking about. Actually, we got on board, me and my dad here. We kind of own a small business and all, and really the Trump image, I remember it very distinctly. I was doing a lot of business in China, and so I was on Skype or QQ or whatever.
Wow, you've got an interesting life.
And so, well, it's pretty varied, but you have to wear all hats in my background. But anyway, I can remember the very first day at that point, I was on, well, about this time, every night with a girl that was working with a trading company, and really about every day. So it's kind of like a second shift. But anyway, I remember the day they came, down the escalator, and so anyway, she was mentioning politics, and I said, well, I don't know Trump, but that's a great image, with his family, and as far as and that's another subject, but China is very traditional in the sense that some people might say, well, anyway, that's another subject for another day, but in the sense that they put China first,
Yeah.
in the sense that the Han Chinese as the dominant, they are representative of the majority of the Han Chinese, and then you've got all these ethnic. But anyway, I said, well, that's a great image. But anyway, we got on board quickly, and that's when he was really running against Ted Cruz and the other guys. But really, 1 month, into the presidency, I just fell out in a sense of how that the foreign policy, and then, well, it just. But anyway, I would loop back around. And, actually, I've been to 3. When it came to Georgia, I was at the Dalton rally. And I was actually at a couple other rallies. But, of course, the Dalton rally, that was what, January the 3rd, I think. So that was the final rally. But it was very surreal in a sense. I took a guy that works with me or works for me here, and this whole hit, the songs there, and this sort of monologue that he always played. It was a sense that, I don't know, before the rally was over, we were walking out to beat the crowd, and this well-dressed, you heard that music, and you knew at that point he had lost. And so there was this very well-dressed upper middle class guy, from probably Cobb County. We start chatting. He's like, well, are you going to the inauguration? And I was like, well, no, I don't have any plans. Or are you going to January the 6th? No, I told him I don't have any plans. And he was like, well, he said, I've got tickets. Here's a guy in his sport coat, well-dressed guy. He's got, I've got tickets. He looked at me, squarely in the eye. I can still see him. And he said, do you think he's really going to win? Or, and I was like, and at that point, you just felt it. And me and my buddy, we looked at each other, and, we just felt at that point that this guy had been hoodwinked. And, this is a guy you would think that, but yeah, it was pretty interesting. Huge crowd. Dalton, Georgia is about, 20, 30 miles from where I live. But, it was interesting. And in a sense, I was there in a sense I wanted to see history, very interesting.
Yeah.
History, but
it is interesting. Like I would not, I mean, it's easy to be a snob and say, all these Q supporters, what a bunch of idiots, and that's probably correct for a lot of them, if we're honest. Yeah. But I wouldn't underestimate the intelligence and like general competence of a lot of these people who really got into the cult. And, there were a lot of, there were guys, again, like, with Charlottesville, there was this whole gamut, and you had thugs, you had kind of goofy types, you had white nationalist online alt-right people, you had me, you had David Duke. It was just this gamut of like grab bag potpourri. And I think you could see a lot of that in January 6th. For every guy that was, some guy with a big beard and, hairy and smelly and yelling about Mike Pence or whatever, there was like an older woman with a Gucci handbag,
Right.
So it was, yeah. I mean, a lot of people really did get hoodwinked in that, but that's kind of remarkable that you were close to a guy who's like, "Where are you going to J6? J6?
Yeah,
Wow."
right. Or will you be at the inauguration? Now, I actually went to there was a South Georgia rally, but now, you know, you were getting more crazies, you know, as time went on. There was a lot of crazies there, and of course, a lot of the what do they call the Chinese, the what's that group, you know, with the Chinese anywhere for freedom, you know, the
I
Taiwanese
think,
or
I think,
Oh,
are you,
Taiwanese.
Yeah.
I thought you were talking about the Falun Gong. Is it that group?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, the Falun Gong. There you go. Yeah, there was, you know, there was a large crowd of those, and that was very interesting because you got these, you know, working class whites, and the Falun Gong is approaching them with literature, and it was a real circus, you know, to say the least. But I think, though, going back to the Dalton rally, one thing that it was, you know, if you think about a coup or like a holding to power, there was a moment, you know, when actually they thought, you know, it was right by the Dalton airport, and you had a business jet land, and everybody thought that was him. And I kept telling people that, well, his jet can't, you know, land here and all. They didn't have him. You know, it's just a small, probably 5,000 or 6,000 feet runway there. But anyway, it was the moment actually that he flew in, but very low, you know, in the helicopter. And so it's actually, you know, sort of a show of force, you know, the way he came in, and he sort of made a circle, you know, circle the airport. And it was an unusual way. And actually you could almost feel the, you know, the wind or whatever. You could, you know, the noise and all off of the helicopter. So a very low pass over. And so that was sort of and then he had his family, of course, Ivanka, and so in a sense, and she actually spoke at the end of the rally. So that was interesting. But anyway.
Yeah, you know, I've never been to a Trump rally. I feel like I've missed something. Although maybe I'll get an opportunity to go to one.
Never been to one. Yeah.
I went to the RNC. I mean, that was in 2016, and that was crazy. And I'll remember a lot of those moments for a long time. But I've never been to like a real Trump rally, and I probably have missed out.
Now, I was thinking about Steve Bannon. Now, in a sense, though, wasn't he always real as far as foreign policy? Wasn't he real pro-Israel? I mean, in a sense, of course, when he was, I guess.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
I think Steve. I think it's safe to say that he's very pro-Israel. I mean, Steve Bannon was a pretty mainstream Republican in many ways. And still is. But yeah, he's definitely pro-Israel. I've never heard him say anything. Yeah.
Also, Breitbart, which of course he was at for a while, was literally founded in Israel. And
yes.
I think he was also a pretty big booster of the idea of moving the embassy to Jerusalem back in the day.
Yeah, right.
And Steve Bannon is kind of back. I mean, I remember Steve Bannon was like denounced by Trump and things back. It was after Charlotte's, or did he got kicked out? What was it that happened? After Charlottesville, they almost made him a bit of a sacrificial lamb or something. And I don't know the inner workings of that. But I think the main thing was that he was talking to that guy who wrote that book that was called like Fury or something.
Yeah, that's Fire and Fury by Michael Wolff. Good book, by the way.
Yeah. And he was talking to him, and he said something bad about Trump. Like, I can't remember what it was.
Yeah, I don't.
But
my memory's not so specific either. But I think the main issue, at least the impression I got, was the main issue was he was vying for influence against Jared and Ivanka, as many would, and of course everyone who went head to head against them lost that battle with Trump.
Sure. And didn't he called Jared a cuck? Wasn't that the thing? Like, to his face?
I don't remember that, but undoubtedly they had some face-to-face confrontations, but I don't recall anything specific.
Yeah, which shows the power of the alt-right as well at that point, that he was using that term, which a lot of these terms come from the internet in general, like, and the alt-right just kind of adopts them afterward. But I do think cuck was uniquely alt-right.
Another question I had, today, of course, the January the 6th hearings, the headlines were actually they felt that Trump knew that the election was a fraud, at that time. And so a question I've always had is about the sincerity of Trump. In other words, did he sit down with Jared and some other guys and say, look, if our strategy is with the white Christian Americans, the evangelicals and all, in other words, this is a winning strategy. So actually how much, and that started actually back with Nixon, in a sense, Richard Nixon,
Sure.
To the Southern strategy.
Sure.
So, how sincere, how much of that did he actually believe? That's something that's always interested me.
I think it's hard to, I think it's hard to like differentiate exactly, because when you're that desperate and there's a point at which a lot of these things that a disinterested observer would find ridiculous, when you're that desperate, you believe. And so I think also, like, the best con men believe their own con.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think that it was some weird combination. I don't think he was twirling his mustache, basically saying like, oh, I don't believe any of this. The more implausible, the better, or something like that. I don't think he was that cynical. I think he did believe it to some extent. And he's got a certain kind of intelligence. He is kind of brilliant in his way, but he's not exactly like a strategic. He is a strategic. He's got some brilliant intelligence for like knowing where centers of energy are and going towards them. And I think it's even a kind of like real estate strategy in a way, where he wants to go to a kind of undervalued like neighborhood in order to make a lot of money off it. And I think he did that to a very large degree by just like leaning into the birth certificate stuff with Obama, or all this kind of stuff. But yeah, I guess I kind of lost my train there. I think he believed it. I think his type of mind, it's not an analytic mind or like a lawyerly mind or a scholarly mind. And so he sees some nonsense on the internet. He's like, what the fuck is this?
So when I was a teenager, I remember reading about the Obama birth certificate, and I knew it was baloney because his mother was an American citizen, and at birth, it didn't matter where he'd be born. He'd be an American citizen regardless.
Right.
And thus eligible for the presidency. So even if he was born in Kenya, the fact he had an American mother would make it like just a non-issue from day one.
Yeah.
That is, I would say, I don't want to derail into some legal minutia, but it's not that simple an issue. It gets into the question of what a natural born citizen is within the meaning of the Constitution. It doesn't just mean someone who's a citizen from birth, which Obama undoubtedly was. So the question was, is being born on US soil a necessary element of being a quote natural born citizen in the Constitution? And this did come up to a certain extent even with John McCain, because he actually wasn't born on US territory either. He was born on a US military base in Panama, I believe, in the Panama Canal.
It came up with Ted Cruz as well, who was born in Canada.
Yeah. Yes, he was born in Canada, and actually, it seems like Ted Cruz would pretty strongly, arguably, be not eligible. With McCain, does say, well, could you analogize that this military base was really U.S. soil, and so it counts? Anyway, I'm just saying the issue isn't as simple as, oh, his mother was a U.S. citizen, so he's in. It is more complicated than that.
I just foresee that if this were to come to a court with the president being born a citizen of American parents but not on U.S. soil, I think that the Supreme Court would probably, maybe for political reasons, to save an election, not throw out the winning candidate, say you are an American citizen based on who you are born to, thus born an American citizen.
Yeah, I agree that ultimately, like if Ted Cruz, let's say, had steamrolled through the primaries and gotten elected, I couldn't imagine any court stepping in and saying, oh, wait, we're disqualifying you because X, Y, Z. Yeah, I'm just saying there is more of a nuanced legal question than what you might see sort of at first glance, let's say.
Mm-hmm. And also, I mean, we're also just bearing the lead here. I mean, that whole birth certificate thing was just 100% about race. Like,
yeah, definitely. Yeah.
The liberals are often just like very accurate when they say that, like, yeah, this is about race. Like, this is not, no one brought it up. I think it got brought up like almost ironically with Ted Cruz, but like no one talked about it. And it's just like, who is this guy? Is he a Muslim? We don't know. Where is he from?
I believe there were more among Republican voters. There was some poll that came out during the 2016 cycle, I think, like among Republican voters, more of them thought that Obama was born overseas than thought that Ted Cruz was born overseas, something like that.
Yeah. But wow, it's wild stuff.
Well, I think that narrative of the birth certificate, it just goes in line with pushing the envelope in the sense that that's how you make waves. And really, that's what Trump is, a salesman. And, if you characterize him, I would think of, well, as he's a fighter. And that's the thing, even with this, like you said before, with this hearing, there'll still be a fairly large amount of people that will support him because they'll see, he's a fighter and this is an attack. And so people love a fighter.
Mm-hmm.
And anything, fighting the establishment. And really, well, there was a lot of people told me, older men, and guys, and they'd say, well, there's never been a president, that's ever fought like Trump against the establishment. And then they would go back to Eisenhower and all the way back, these were older gentlemen. So was that whole idea of I started listening to your palo conservatism there, so just a few minutes of it, but you were getting into that whole background. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Buchanan and
I think Perot is a kind of forgotten figure who's very important as well. I don't think it's rare that you hear someone mention Perot. He had a huge effect, or at least was kind of symptomatic of all this stuff. And that paleo, the paleo conservative moment was very similar to the alt-right moment. I mean, the alt-right moment was certainly more uncouth and more wild and younger and stupid, but that had a lot to do with the fact that the internet wasn't around in 1996, and so you just had this onboarding of all of these young people, and but it was definitely, yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of there are many similarities between it, and I think we can kind of learn from it, because first off, I think with the paleoconservative movement, there's a problem with the kind of like ideological incoherence. So you had Samuel Francis, who was very theoretical and was moving towards populism, middle American radicals, and National Socialism, as he said himself. I'm not trying to slander him or anything. And he was moving towards this idea. And in total, I would say also kind of like total rejection of the kind of like Southern anti-state strategy, you know, like, oh, we believe in states' rights, or the get the government off my back, or so on. I mean, Sam Francis was like, we need the government on your back. Like we need a new manager, a political regime that will bring to heel the managerial regime in corporations and so on. So anyway, Murray Rothbard was just a full-on anarchist. I mean, to his credit, I mean, he was very ideologically consistent, but those were incompatible, you know, those two ideologies. And so I think there was like a lot of incoherence. And I think with the alt-right, there was a lot of just like trolling silliness where it could never get to an ideology, because it was all about 4chan and memes and being silly and so on. And I'm guilty of all this as well, you know, just to be honest. Maybe I recognize it and was less guilty, but yeah, it was all about being outrageous and being young and crazy. And there's some good things about that, but it can't really go anywhere. So I guess my vision is that I think this populism as like an energy, and it's almost like an intergenerational energy, because you can definitely see a lot of this in like Wallace, and you can see it in Perot, you can see it in Donald Trump in the year 2000 with the Reform Party, you can see it in Buchanan, you can see it in the Tea Party. There's this like intergenerational energy, a force that animates a certain people, and it is a class to a large extent, but it does go beyond just a kind of like middle America kind of thing. It's a little more widespread, but you can, maybe if you can locate it somewhere, it is that a middle American radical and a kind of middle class or lower middle class. It's not exactly a working class thing like from Marxism. So it's more of a kind of a middle revolt.
So
oh yeah, go ahead. Well, you can ask the question, then I'll go on. Go ahead.
Oh, so when you say it's a lower class thing, but also an intergenerational thing, this vision of
I said a middle class thing. I didn't say lower class, but I think maybe it's actually becoming more lower class as all of our prospects are declining and so on. But I think there's at the very least a middle quality to it. It's not like I'm a union worker. I understand myself as working class. But you have elements of that, yes. But the bigger thing I think is actually middle.
I would define it as more as income oriented. So I would say that it's people that pay tax. You know, mm-hmm. As far as, because you've got a lot of people that pay tax are not on the social economic pretty low, but in a sense that they see basically since the interstate 1965, in the sense of the Interstate Commerce Act, they see the welfare state. So I think it's a revolt against the welfare state in a sense, especially in the South. In the South, it is, because you see, yeah.
My vision of it, what Spencer was saying, was I view it as kind of like the guy, the 20 something who isn't going anywhere, plus the older guy whose wife left him. When he said middle class, I view it maybe a kind of middle class loser, for lack of a better term.
Yes, let me jump in real quick. So we should not underestimate the youth of the alt-right in 2016, and even like the Fuentes crowd of 2020. There were a lot of people who were teenagers, and I think that's definitely true. And there are a lot of people who just live on the internet and have no prospects and don't want to have any prospects. I also, with January 6th, that was a middle age revolt as well. So the average age was like 42 or 45 or something like that. Maybe a little bit surprising, in the sense that you might think that if there's going to be a hot revolution, it's going to be people in their 20s or something. Suicide bombers are in their 20s. But it was middle. Also, higher level of divorce among January 6th protesters than among the general public. So I think there was something to that. Like Ashley Babbitt was kind of, at her wit's end financially, from what we know. And so there was a lot of stress, and maybe getting away from like the tax-paying middle class. I think that had a lot to do with the Southern strategy, no question. But yeah, I don't know. I would just still stress this middle, plus some 4chan guys in their teens and 20s.
Yeah, one thing I would say is like kind of like back to what you're saying is that you look back to whether it's the 50s, the 80s, maybe even the 90s, and I don't think America was this like tense. There might have been some anti-white propaganda, but probably not as much as like what happened in the 2000s onward. And just divorce rates, like you said, people maybe having struggled meeting partners, finances, whatever. I wasn't around, but I'm probably just guessing that the 80s and 90s were probably, at least the 80s was probably a lot better of a time. And, a lot of people are probably stressed and radicalizing, etc.
Mm-hmm. No question. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think it's very, particularly with Zoomers and a lot of millennials, I mean, this kind of like, you'll never own a house, you will never really be a taxpayer, and you don't have any prospects, and you have $200,000 of student loan debt. I mean, that's a real experience for many people. That kind of like bourgeois dream is over. I mean, I think even Trump said this at his rally. Like he would say things like he's like, the American dream is dead. He would say really tough stuff like that, but he was getting at something. But anyway, what I would say is that moving forward, I definitely think that there will be a continuation of this energy, this intergenerational energy that might even have a kind of biological basis. Like it's the same, your grandfather was for Wallace and your father was for Buchanan and you are for Trump. Like there's something to this. And I don't think it will go away. But I don't also think that it can really win or be viable. And just speaking for myself, I think on some level it needs to be ignored or kind of criticized or understood. That is not something that I would want to get invested in. I do think that my vision is to be frank, more conspiratorial and sinister, to be honest. And I guess I mean sinister in both senses of that word. The left-handed path, like, we cannot just be up front and stand in front of a bulldozer. We need to have a unified group ideologically, and that group also needs to be unified socially. But that might not be something that's ever out in front, or it's not exactly front stage. I would much prefer to host meetings that are more like Davos World Economic Forum, that is invitation only, and that are private and in fact, secret, than something that is like, let's go to Charlottesville and stand up for the statues and basically get our asses kicked. So that is my vision, and it's going to be a kind of more difficult one, but I don't see any other option. And I also do see the populist as kind of serving a certain purpose, in the sense of like taking eyes off things that we want to do.
Yeah, I would say that's actually a good idea. Like I know that I know Freemasons, they do, that's kind of like the whole thing. I knew a Freemason once, and it was all about like going to secret, I don't know if it was secret, but like going to like lodges and, private meetings and stuff. And and then they have a lot of power, like a lot of I think several presidents were Freemasons, and
they had a lot of influence and power. Yeah. Not to sound like a complete nerd, but the Sith the Sith Order had to spend 1,000 years before Emperor Palpatine was able to take over and reveal himself. And his greatest secret was hiding his dark side energy around people. Sorry for the nerdery, but you can learn things from these Star Wars movies.
Hiding power. There is much to take from that.
Yeah. As opposed to just losing.
Yes.
And losing's no fun.
Yeah.
Well, the great unanswered question is, though, going back to Nietzsche, the birth of tragedy. How does modern civilization change course? Because it's been, if you look at the birth of tragedy, it's been on the wrong course for so long. How do we recorrect?
Oh, sorry, you're a little bit muted there.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
There you go. I can hear you now.
Okay. Yeah, going back to the birth of tragedy. I missed your Nietzsche course, but anyway, looking at it's the sense that modern civilization has been on the wrong course. If you're looking at the Dionysus and other ways, how do we recorrect then? That's a great unanswered question. Yeah,
it is an unanswered question, and I know I kind of like to speak abstractly and talk in metaphors and so on, but I think sometimes that's the right way to think of it. But there is a flow to what is happening. And, like the whole transgender thing, I didn't predict that occurring after, say, roughly 2014, when the Supreme Court affirmed gay marriage, and there was just it just seemed like that whole issue had just been settled. And there weren't many more things on the checklist of the cultural left to accomplish. I never would have imagined that we would be talking about drag queens as like a social issue and, you know, hormone therapy and etc. But in retrospect, you can see all of this as just almost an inevitable advancement or outcome of things. Like there is a motion to the world, and it's kind of logically working its way out. And if we just endlessly resist that motion, then in that logic, then it's much like trying to empty the ocean with a bucket or swim against the tide, as it were. And sometimes you need to kind of swim with the tide and not resist things that are more powerful than you. Actually, at our first meeting, I told a story, which is, again, it's a little anecdotal story, but it's just a kind of metaphor that I've always remember really distinctly from my childhood. And that is, I was at Camp Longhorn in Texas, and we went on a little field trip to the Inks Lake State Park, which is near camp. And they have some cliffs, and you like jump off cliffs, and it's all good fun. I was in this river area, and I was alone swimming, and I was away from everyone, and I was swimming upstream, and I exhausted myself, and then I realized that I was actually going backwards, and I couldn't get to where where we were, because the stream like ran around a pass. And I was swimming harder and harder, and I just felt like I would exhaust myself and drown doing this. Of course, these camp counselors maybe should be criticized for allowing this to happen. But glad I wouldn't have the anecdote if they saved me. And so I just let myself go. And the stream, the current took me around the bend to a point where I actually could get out. And if I just endlessly swum, I would be dead. And so, like, we can't reverse the current of world history. It has a logic. And, you know, to just try to valiantly but vainly swim upstream, I think is going to just lead to a lot of problems. It's going to lead to death and martyrdom. And sometimes you need to just let yourself go and be taken by the current. And I don't think anything can really fundamentally change to like get a culture on a new course unless it's worked its way through its own internal logic. So it's I guess a bit of a Hegelian response. And I know it kind of sounds like I'm saying, oh, just wait for it to collapse or something. I guess I kind of am saying that. I think it needs to, I don't think there's going to ever be like a Mad Max situation like collapse, but I do think there's going to be a legitimacy crisis at the end of this, that all of these things are going to kind of work themselves out to a point where something new is possible. Like there will be a new opportunity.
Well, I think that, you know, there's actually some encouraging signs. One thing I see, and actually I do live in the Bible Belt, but the moral code of the church it's actually, we can see it's nearing an end, in the sense. I was talking to a Southern Baptist minister here recently, and he said, you know, there's debate in the Southern Baptist about gay marriage and ordination. And really, it's the fact that actually my next door neighbor is a Southern Baptist, First Baptist Church here in my community, He's a pastor. But it's really, you know, they don't really stand for anything. And we've got an interesting local phenomenon, in a sense. We have a dry county, and we've never had liquor stores. And so actually, it was just passed this last week that the business right across the business there that we have, there's going to be a liquor store. So, I'm not too happy about that really, because, liquor stores bring all kinds of people. But in the old days, you could rely on the Southern, Baptist, in general, and they kept them out. But see, I talked to a city council lady, and I didn't hear about it. I'm not really involved in local politics. I knew it was going on. And she said, well, she's actually a big supporter of Marjorie Taylor Greene. But anyway, she said, well, there's no pushback, no churches, no anything. So really, you can't go out here and, it's a sense that a lot of things have changed. And it's reached a point of such liberalization that really, like here, I say, well, the churches, it wasn't just Baptist. I found out that on the city board, there were holiness or free holiness or these real tongues people, one of them was this and that. And they didn't actually put any zoning laws like to push back. So it's reached a point now that, if you call yourself a traditionalist, well, I'm traditional. I think that, we need to keep it the way it was before, or the way it's been, that's out of line with. So to me, Christianity is kind of reaching the end to its usage, other than being social. It's more of a, it's a great thing. It's a sense that it's a social cohesion, and it's a great way. If you move into this type of community, if you attend church, that's a way to get to know people. But it's interesting.
Yeah,
that, sure. There's no pushback, but that's kind of, that's just a local thing. But it's.
Can I ask a question? So,
yeah,
if I just heard your accent, I would peg you for. I do hear the Georgia in there, but I would peg you as like a Baptist or something. But I'm just curious. Like, have you left? Are you still a member of the church, or are you a believer, or is that an important part of your life?
Well, actually, I was raised as a Methodist, but
a Methodist. Okay.
Yeah, I'm actually non-active. I was actually educated. I went to college on the East Coast, but they would. They said they call me Tex, but I don't talk fast enough to be a Texan. Yeah.
You don't talk like a Texan. Yeah.
No, I don't talk fast enough. But anyway, well, that's one thing about my personality. I just stay true to who I am, So but anyway, no, actually, I've evolved. I guess more, in the line of work I do, as far as being in the public a lot, it's better just to kind of stay neutral. And but I don't really attend church. I guess I'm more like the Episcopal. I think it was Ed was talking about the Episcopal priest. They're more the closeted. I think that was Ed. It said it was a closeted, atheist. But I'm leaning more in that direction. But anyway, that's a great.
That probably is true. Episcopalians are closeted atheists.
Yeah. Yeah, they was. Yeah, I think. Yeah, closeted atheists. And actually, that's very ironic because I deal with churches. I better not. I don't know. I better not say too much. But anyway, I deal with churches a lot. But anyway, I was talking to this Episcopal, and he was actually Reformed Episcopal, or I forget what it was. But I said, well, and I heard y'all do have a high IQ, but a lot of you are atheists. And he said, yeah, that's right. That's the reason we pulled out of I think, he was Anglican, something. Right. So he had pulled out of the Episcopal Church. I don't know, but anyway, yeah, it's but really it's money. It's money, runs the world, and so that's where a lot of. I actually had an uncle. He was a Methodist preacher, and actually when he retired, and he had a good retirement, in a sense, he stayed in there years. But when he retired, he quit church. He never did attend anymore. So there was the National Council of Churches, and that was back in the 60s. And actually, my grandmother, growing up, my grandparents were really Reagan, conservatives, but they would talk about, the National Council of Churches. So that's where the mainline denominations, which, if you talk about evangelicals, it's interesting, if you think about, say, Methodist or Presbyterian, they vary in that idea, of course, premillennialism. And that's where a lot of the evangelicals like Southern Baptist and Church of God and those others are really so pro-Israel, because they believe during the Great Tribulation there'll be a coming back.
Premillennials believe that the apocalypse is coming. Right? And so like a post-millennial believes that it was described in the book of Revelations?
Well, actually a premillennial, if you have that belief, you believe in the rapture. And so what it is, if you're a Christian, if you go to church, you will be raptured up, and then you will escape the Great Tribulation. But during that time, their beliefs vary. But most of them believe that during that time, I think it was 7 years, the God will actually come back for the Jews. And so that's where you have, in other words, the covenant. And that's the eternal covenant. And so that falls in line very well with Calvinism, because you had the covenant in the Old Testament, in other words, the eternal covenant of Calvinism, of eternal security. And so they believe that the original covenant with Israel could not be broken. And so God will come back especially for his chosen people. And then after the Jews have that second chance, after they have awakening, it'll be a small number, then actually that'll be the end. And then I guess the Great Tribulation, and I guess the rest of people will, there'd be an apocalypse or something. But a millennialist, he believes that God's chosen people will live through the tribulations. And so if you're a millennialist, that's actually the old beliefs of like John Wesley and even the Methodist Church. They believe you will live through, the tribulation, and then that'll be the end of the world. You'll be raptured. It's been a while since but that is that's the whole thing of the euphoria about why there's such a connection. Like I was talking about my neighbor, he goes, I think, to Israel almost every year. So that's where that connection is, because they look at the Jews as special people. And of course, like you mentioned, the embassy in Jerusalem. So that's they point to that as the end of time is near, see, as Israel increases its power and all. So that's an interesting. Been a while since I've, but that's an interesting thing when you think about evangelicals. And so actually, it was Dwight Moody, I think, that actually popularized that so much. And most of them believe that, and that's where they believe about the rapture. But
this is the man who founded the Moody Bible College.
That's right. Yeah.
Interesting.
And he, but anyway, so.
Well, yeah. I mean, even I don't know. It is funny. I mean, in terms of like the evangelicals, I mean, I don't even quite know what to make of them now, because I think there's a lot of countervailing things that are occurring. But the Southern Baptist Convention shrinks every year. I think it it's been falling by like 5% year on year since 2004. And I think there is a kind of like secular component to Marjorie Taylor Greene or Lauren Boebert or something, in the sense that they don't really know what they're talking about, I guess. And for them, I think Christianity is kind of pure nationalism and politics and Trump and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this yearning for the apocalypse is deeply unhealthy, and it kind of is a self-fulfilling prophecy as well. It's so anti-life. It promotes the end of seeking, rejuvenation and power and all of that. So I think it might be a kind of fitting thing that comes at the end of white America.
So what do you think of the fact that Nick Fuentes, for example, is a Catholic, and like a lot of the older conservative types are these evangelical Protestant types, and the Catholicism has a very dull eschatology. It's not as dramatic as the Left Behind series or the Chick tracts or the countless evangelical, made for TV movies.
Right. In being Nick Fuentes is a peculiar character, and the fact that he's kind of a Hispanic on some level is also very interesting. And I think he does have a lot in common with a lot of the kind of like people coming into the GOP. The GOP is more and more popular among Hispanics, but in terms of the Catholicism, I mean, you're probably going to draw me out as a Episcopalian. I mean, I have a almost conspiratorial view of Catholics in the conservative movement. They are everywhere. And there is something interesting about Catholic intellectuals leading Protestants. And you can see this with the religious right. So, I mean, when Roe v. Wade occurred in 1973, it was endorsed by the Southern Baptists. And as a right to privacy, just something we shouldn't talk about. It was really a Catholic issue. And Paul Weyrich, I believe he wasn't Catholic. He was something weird. He was like an Orthodox or something. Anyway, Paul Weyrich is an example of these kind of high church people wrangling the white Protestants. And so the voting base of the religious right was Protestant. The intellectual base was Catholic. And we have a situation, I mean, you can see this, the Supreme Court. I mean, Clarence Thomas is a Catholic convert. Alito is a cradle Catholic. Amy Coney Barrett is a cradle Catholic. Gorsuch is a bit ambiguous, but
he is an Episcopal, actually. I heard.
Yeah, I heard that as well. The only Protestant in the court.
Gorsuch is a cradle Catholic. He went to the same Jesuit prep school that Kavanaugh did, but I think in recent years he goes to his wife's church, and I believe she's Episcopalian.
Okay. So anyway, this affirms the theory. There's a Catholicism behind it, and being a kind of anyway, he's a little bit ambiguous. Kavanaugh is not ambiguous, and from William F. Buckley on down, you have, or on up, I guess, to our day. I mean, like Newt Gingrich is a Catholic convert. Rick Santorum is a Catholic convert, I believe. I mean, it just never ends. Antonin Scalia, I could go on. The predominance of Catholic intellectuals in the conservative movement cannot be underestimated. It is a network. And maybe it's something even beyond that. And even the kind of like Irish component of the more populist wing, the Hannity, Bill O'Reilly, Tucker is an exception to that rule. He's Protestant. And Waspy. There is a very strong Catholic contingent. And I don't know if you should understand it like purely ideologically or as just as networking or something like that. But it is there.
Well, I'm trying to understand it from the fact that you think that there's this feeling that we're going off a cliff as a society, and you think that it would be more evangelicalism that would be more prominent than much more prominent than Catholicism with its dramatic end of days ism.
Right.
And Catholicism's end of days is rather mild. I mean, Islam has, particularly Wahhabism, has a more dramatic end of daysism. And for a lot of people on the right, apocalyptic thinking is a center component, whether they be secular, whether they be racial, anti-racial. We see it in the movement with, Covington's novels and the Turner Diaries and all that stuff.
Yeah. I think for most conservative, the conservative base is still going to remain Protestant or kind of nominally Protestant or formerly Protestant. But I was just talking about the intellectual, but yeah, I do think a certain type of apocalypsism. I mean, QAnon was almost like what was that book series that came out in the Millennium, Left Behind series?
That's correct. Yeah, and they made a crappy movie of Kirk Cameron, and they never finished it.
Well, they made another one with Nicolas Cage.
And they also never finished it as well. There was supposed to be a sequel. There's this theme of them like embarking on this ambitious project to create this apocalyptic series that covers all of the evangelical thing, and they just never finish it. Just gets aborted after the first trimester.
I guess they kind of expect to make their money back. I mean, to create a franchise, you need to have a big film, and then the second one's bigger than the first, and then you're like, all right, this is a franchise now. And the big one, the first film did not make enough money for them to justify continuing to do that, unless they had just billions at their disposal and they were just willing to throw money at something. But yeah, it is what it is. I do think that this type of thinking, I mean, QAnon is a kind of like internet 2.0 version of the Left Behind series in many ways, and in kind of updated and gamified and so on. So I think this type of thinking is going to be there. I mean, they truly believe in the storm. I mean, the last words, or at least the last words that we know of Ashley Babbitt, were "the storm is coming." I mean, she was quoting QAnon's final post.
She said, "The storm is here," or she said, "I think this is the storm," as they stormed the Capitol.
Yeah, we're the storm. Like, we're making the prophecy come true. The storm was going to be, Donald Trump frog marching Hillary Clinton and various pedophiles down Pennsylvania Avenue, but that didn't happen. And so we're going to kind of make it happen. Like, we are the storm.
Well, they believe
this is something that's interesting, hasn't been touched on in the January 6th committee. I don't think QAnon has been mentioned, but it's an indispensable component. But go ahead.
Yeah, they believe, what was it? RFK was coming. I saw actually here locally, there was a sign Trump and RFK, and I couldn't understand that. I had to Google that, but actually I guess they think that Kennedy would be reincarnated, or they waited for him out there somewhere in Texas.
I think there's another, John F. Kennedy Jr., who I can remember, he died in a plane accident like in the 90s. And he was kind of an interesting guy. He started a magazine called George, which was almost like a centrist political lifestyle magazine or so. I mean, I think it failed, but it showed kind of some ambition on his part. But he died in a plane accident, and they thought that he learned about the cabal and then secretly hid himself. It's wild stuff. and a lot of this doesn't come from Q himself, but it comes from Q thinkers. So Q just put down these breadcrumbs and people followed them all over the place. So it was kind of gamified, as I say. They kind of created their own fantasy world.
So it was largely from Reddit then or something. They had
Reddit was big, and the Chans, and just various social media before they started cracking down on it. It's remarkable stuff.
Well, actually, quickly though, they believe the storm is coming. Then what do they really believe? And in the end, they think it's the end of the world or something. Or
I think it's almost like the good guys win. I mean, I don't know what they believe now. I mean, that's a real interesting question. They might be kind of more apocalyptic, but they definitely believed that the good guys were going to triumph, and that there was just going to be this, massive arrest of pedophiles.
Oh, yeah. So they would play into that Epstein thing or something.
Oh yeah. And we're just going to arrest them all, and then Donald Trump was going to win and be president maybe forever, and just this amazing, good times. It was a kind of like positive conspiracy theory.
Well, that's very interesting. Elon Musk, he tweeted out, what about Epstein? What about what happened? Nobody. Why wasn't he investigated?
Well, I think he tweeted out, why haven't they released the witness or the guest list, basically, which they surely have. Why haven't they just made that public? Why is that suppressed?
That's right.
Good question.
They kind of these kinds of people, they reminded me of I don't know. It definitely seems like they watched a lot of Hollywood movies, and they kind of have this stereotypical view of the good guy, like you mentioned, they think they're the good guy, and they want this crazy kind of homicidal villain, or the whole Pizzagate thing. I think that was the first big conspiracy theory, at least from my memory. And then Epstein, and not to say that there's not truth to some of that, or I don't know, but maybe the whole just being hyped up on it, and and not just that, but they with the whole January 6th thing, they do almost kind of remind me of kind of like the rebels from Star Wars, or some kind of just movie hero where they we're the good guys, I
always
hate some stuff,
It's the dark side.
But
it's a deeply American thing.
It's definitely that. They'd have that kind of attitude to just, we're going to fight the bad guys. We're going to take them down. We're going to,
Definitely. And Patriots was kind of their call sign. That's how you know the good guys from the bad. And being anonymous was kind of a call sign as well.
And actually, Antifa kind of almost makes their perfect villain in a way too, thinking about it, because they wear all black, they wear masks, they're kind of aggressive and secretive, and no, I'm not sympathizing with Antifa, but it is kind of like their perfect villain in a way, in the sense that they need this. It's almost like they have a victim complex. They need something that seems stronger and scarier than them to fight.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. They can't just fight the liberals. They need to fight satanic pedophiles. Oh. All right. Anything else going on? Did you guys want to put a bookmark in it?
I have a question. You linked an
Sure.
article by a gentleman named George Packer, or is it Packard? I'm not sure. about like the four narratives in the U.S. What do you think of that, or as him as a pundit as well? I've seen some of his stuff. It's interesting. He places a lot of hope in Biden.
When did I link this? Or just remind me of this. I don't remember linking this. I know
think
that
it was early
I've been
or
reading
late
him for a long time.
2021.
Okay, you've got a good memory. I remember reading his work in like the New Yorker, where he talked about the Southern strategy and all that kind of stuff. He's kind of like a deep writer, almost like a professor, almost, but he does magazine writing. But just remind me of that article. I don't remember it.
So he said there were four Americas: smart America, educated liberals; free America, corporate people; real America, Trump supporters, Whig Nats; and just America, BLM protesters, trans youth, all those people.
Wait, he probably didn't call them Whig Nats.
Well, he said white nationalists, but
oh, okay.
I guess that would include a lot of us.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I think that's kind of right. And also it's like, you see a lot of these maps go around where they'll have like, there's like Dixie and the Southwest and the Pacific Northwest and then Yankeeville and the Midwest. And they'll have these regions. They're like, America's going to break apart or whatever. I think those types of divisions are much more accurate than any geographical division. Like we have these warring factions that are everywhere. Like you can find the real America in Massachusetts. Anyway, I don't remember the article exactly. You have a better memory than I do, but I think it's pretty much spot on.
And where do you think we as a movement fall in? I mean, you associate the DR with, quote unquote, real America. But obviously, you don't like them. I have my own critiques of them as well.
Well, I mean, I think that any kind of movement that's going to move, that's going to ultimately have influence, is going to have influence with the educated America. To be honest, smart America. I mean, just America or something like that, that's probably not possible. We don't desirable or possible.
He actually said that just America were a lot of educated people that were being pushed downward, and he associated that with the left, and people that would go to, BLM stuff, Antifa stuff, all that. But there are a lot of our guys that have, gone to college and have done and are quite smart, but they've done goofy stuff and gotten themselves doxxed and outcast from careers, or they kept a low profile, or were simply affirmative action out of a lot of jobs.
Yeah, there's no question. Yeah, I mean, I just think, I know this sounds kind of strange, but this is how I genuinely feel. I think it is okay, and it's in fact good for there to be, for the movement, at least what I'm involved in, to be very small. And, like trying to win over, I think the DR is and the alt-right back in the day, I mean, again, it's more or less the same thing, was trying to win over real America. And I don't see that as a real viable strategy. I mean, obviously there can be some people from that contingent who come over and so on, but yeah, I just see a long, it's a long, and it's kind of a difficult roll forward, but it's just something that's going to be done secretly to a very large extent and is not going to be noticed. I just have a very conspiratorial view of moving forward.
You talked about the left-hand path, the sinister path in that sense. It's also clearly, it's a deeper path in the sense that taking that route enables us to, and you were saying this already, but it enables us to address deeper things like religion and the spiritual that we wouldn't really be able to address in anything like a satisfactory way if we were doing directly political work in the public sphere.
Exactly. That doing that closes you off from any deep questions because you just can't do it. You've got to win the next election. And there's always another election right around the corner. I mean, by February of 2021, people were talking about the midterms. How are we going to win these people over? So it's just this kind of endless whack-a-mole or treadmill or whatever metaphor you want to use. You're always reacting and responding. And I just don't, I think that is a just fruitless game. And this might take a very long time, but if we're going to address the issues that I think we need to address, we're not anywhere close to being able to do that. Well, I shouldn't be that pessimistic. We're close to being able to do that. We're taking our first little steps. Publishing Mark's book, I think, is going to be monumental, and meeting together and developing a kind of new movement, but it's going to be small, and we can maybe go swim in those other Americas. Like if you are from real America, like that's cool. If you're if you're from the smart America, that's also cool, maybe better, maybe worse in some ways, but it doesn't matter. Like we can swim in all those ponds, but I don't think we should put any kind of stake in any of those things. The real America is going to probably lose. Just America is going to have maybe kind of like a semblance of victory, but is not really a winner. Smart America will always manage America along with free America, like corporate people. They're going to always be there managing things. And so they'll manage things for us if we were in power. So all of those are kind of flawed in their own way. And I think we should kind of swim in all of them.
I think I quite agree. Sorry, Richard, to bump in there.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
I'm a long time listener, but first time caller in it, if that's a word at all. But
Sure.
I often miss these just because I'm across the Pacific over in Australia. So I'm up at the crack of noon, of course, so don't always get to these. But I just wanted to say I probably myself fit into that white collar category. And I think it's profound. There's a lot of people that are actually very partial to our way of thinking. But I think for reasons that we've often spoken about in these types of circles, it's very poisonous to ever publicly disseminate that, yes, I love my own white people, to put it in crude terms. But I just wanted to thank Ross for those beautiful anecdotes as well. Not to be too lovey-dovey, Ross, and you might not appreciate it, but I've just been watching some Smallville and some Supernatural, and I've pegged you in both of those as Jonathan Kent and Bobby Singer, which you might not appreciate. But yes, I think I quite agree. I think, again, that there are a lot of people that are partial to that and sort of see the beauty in sort of recapturing, I'm talking about sort of this sort of upper middle class, white managerial class that are in white collar work. A lot of people that are sort of working class within the alternate right or whatever, they sort of have an instinctual dislike of that type of people. But I suppose, to speak on behalf of all of them, there is a very sort of almost folksy kinship there, and a almost a paternalism, a paternal love, say. And I think there's probably, just to add what's already been said, is our project is to dissolve this sort of needless antagonism and to sort of make it bear fruit in a way that there is this kinship and this paternalistic love that exists there, and not, I mean, we can all sort of picture a sort of grotesque sort of, someone that owns a business and just hires a whole lot of non-whites just to pardon the crudeness, but just to fuck over, white people and hire cheap non-whites to make a little. But that's not the sort of common thing the whole way through. And just to offer a little bit of light on what's otherwise always a brooding conversation, I thought I'd just mention that. But thank you anyway. It's been a great conversation and a good one to pop the cherry on.
Yeah. And we need to be realistic about our race. I mean, class is largely genetic, and though not entirely. And I don't know. I mean, I think some of the like fire-breathing working class sentiments are just completely irrational and unrealistic. Those correct. Managerial types who you hate, like all of this hatred towards like suburban wine moms, and I'm sure there's analogs in Australia. Keep in mind that they are wine moms. Like they have actualized themselves, and they have children, probably 2, that maybe go to a nice public school or a private school or whatever, and they're being educated. I mean, those people are much more of the future than, a kid on 4chan who's never going to have sex, not to mention reproduce or live in the burbs.
Well, hopefully not.
And yeah, exactly. So we need to be realistic about these things and not just like put our stakes down in real America. Real America has serious problems, and real America is, I was just using this GOP platform as an example. I mean, it's pretty wackadoodle. I mean, let's just be honest. I'm not sure I want to live in the country that they want. And that country would probably be bereft of culture, to be honest.
Yes, just to sort of riff off a couple of things you mentioned there, I think there is something that would appeal to a lot of, I mean, I'm a bit blasé about my who I am, but mentioning, but I suppose I am in sort of finance circles and that, and far be it from a sort of cabal that we're all looking to kill non-white, so we're all looking to kill working class whites and ship in other such and such. If it could be ever pitched, just to flare up everyone's white collar flag there, because that's only a word that's ever spoken in white collar circles, just pitch that it's more about recapturing the majesty of Europe and an ideal. And what you mentioned there about the suburban mum that's drinking wines and watching some crappy TV show at 7 p.m. I mean, that is a great working ideal for a lot of these working class types where there's so much discontent and it seems so horrible, but it's just so, if we could, and I don't want to sound like an excuser for the sort of monogamy weirdos like Fuentes and what, but if somehow we could pitch it to the working class that this is about being, safe and content and having a beautiful, wholesome family that will provide contentment and happiness. And for lots of the upper middle class, managerial and elite whites, this is about recapturing the beauty of Europe and who you are and your lineage. And it's not really about, because they themselves sort of instinctively see, or they hear the term white nationalism or even like a white racialism, and they just think, oh, some, fucking weirdo that like touching himself to Asian porn, like the 16-year-old kid on 4chan, they don't want to be associated with it. And so that's sort of we've almost got a marketing predicament in our, for us. I mean, I completely agree with what you said about being sort of clandestine and with some Palpatine nationalism. And that would be great, because that's, of course, how the wheels of history turn. But we also need sort of agreements with, I think, these groups that I can't remember which author you've borrowed them from, but if we could make the case differently to, horses for courses type say, that would be a beautiful way to make it come together. Sorry to waffle, everyone.
No, it's fine. Yeah, it might not be. It is kind of Darth Sidious nationalism to a degree, and Darth Bane nationalism. These are the guys who ultimately had patience and won out. But yeah, I do think that is our path. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to sound too depressed, but I don't know if I'll ever be in that crazy situation like I was in 2016 and 2017, where it's just like headline after headline, Richard Spencer, Richard Spencer, Richard Spencer. I don't know if that will ever occur again in my life. So maybe it will, maybe it won't. I don't know. I think not. But the question is, like, could I be depressed about that? Okay. It led to a lot of hardships as well. And it wasn't really ultimately going somewhere. So a lot of life is about kind of reframing and, re-understanding what path you have to tread. And I do think that there are other ways of doing this. There are ways of achieving lasting influence and power that aren't just kind of throwing yourself out there and making headlines. I think that was kind of cheap and kind of a counterfeit on some ways. It was almost a counterfeit of a real movement and real power was media attention.
Speaking of something cheap and counterfeit, I live kind of around quote unquote real America, and I think of all the four narratives, real America is kind of the fakest. Like, I've noticed that so many people in quote unquote real America have excessive tattoos in a way that Just America don't. Now, Just America might get, excessive face piercings or dye their hair blue, but real America quote unquote marks themselves permanently, and what they have an aversion to quote unquote exotic foods. I went out with someone that grew up in rural, in a very, very rural part of a rural state, and they were afraid of oysters, and they thought it was absolutely insane how I could eat that sort of thing.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Raw oysters?
Yeah.
Wow. See, my grandfather, although he was a physician, and so he was wealthy, he lived in Monroe, Louisiana, and he hunted all of his life. So he could make a claim to being real America. He would eat raw oysters as if they were potato chips. Like he would just, any opportunity to eat a raw mollusk or whatever they are, you could do it.
You're killing my fantasy that they're all beautiful and handsome like Tom Welling out of Smallville, and instead they're all just tattooed up losers.
Yeah, that's sadly the case.
Who are we fighting for? Damn it.
Well, I don't think we should be fighting for them, and I don't want to, like, Brendan, who's a part of this community and is a cool guy. He gets really he gets a little harsh on this issue, but I might tone it down, but I ultimately agree with him. Like, I don't think we should understand ourselves as fighting for those people. And I think that's actually a big problem if we do. First off, they have their own champions. And second off, I don't think they ultimately want what we want. Now, with the real America type people, would they have it better in a world run by us? Of course. But they don't know that. And I don't think we really have anything to offer them. Like, if I were to offer thinking people, telling them, like, I am literally with Mark attempting to create a new religion. And this is very, outrageously ambitious, you could say. But we are actually going to do it. And it is very serious what we are doing. But this might take decades. And it is not something that I might even not see it. And what we need to do is create, like, again, the left-hand path and just smaller communities that are trying to engage in projects and influence on our own. If I pitched that to the guy in Kalispell who was screaming at me, he would just scream at me or laugh at me. He wants nothing to do with it.
Can't comprehend it. Yeah.
No. If he comprehends it, it sounds awful.
Yeah, because that type of person is so partial to just grabbing a pitchfork and screaming obscenities, and they want, I mean, there's a reason why Trump, of course, appealed to them, is because he's just a buffoonish, and they see themselves in him like just someone that'll be crude and vulgar and outrageous, and that's what appeals to them. Whereas the sort of, and I don't mean this in a facetious way, like just this sort of intellectual approach and again, that word, the clandestine approach of, no, this is very, very difficult stuff that's got to be, made incrementally. That they just look at you and go, and that homosexual.
Right.
So every time I listen to one of your things, Richard, there's some hideous, vulgar cretin rings up with the homosexual slur. I can't believe it. Set your watch to it, type of thing.
Do you know how, like, if it were a basketball score of the amount of pussy I've gotten in my life and the amount of pussy achieved by the guy calling me gay, it would be like the Harlem Globetrotters versus the Washington Generals. It would be like 100-0 or something.
And that's the obvious part. I mean, the Freudian part is that, let's not even mention the Freudian part of it, but that's even funnier.
Right. But anyway, so I don't know, that's just my vision. I think also Brendan had an interesting observation as well, and it's something that I was talking about earlier on the call, which is that, like, so like he brought this up with Patriot Front, and Patriot Front were unmasked when they were arrested in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and they, again, they're hiding their identity. They want to keep it secret. The COVID's over and they're still wearing masks, all that kind of stuff. And it's like what Brendan was saying. It was like, first off, who are you? You haven't demonstrated that someone should follow you. Like and you can't demonstrate that if you're anonymous. But additionally, like, those people in Texas and those people at January 6th, they weren't wearing masks, at least to a large degree. I guess some of them might have been. Those people in Texas signed their name to an agenda that called out homosexuals as abnormal, I think is the word they used, and floated the idea of secession next year. Literal, like, we're leaving the United States. Like, these guys, again, I don't support their causes exactly. Maybe I support some of them, but you know what I mean. I look at them as kind of wacky, but, like, are they wimps? No, they're badasses. And they are signing their name to things and showing their face and doing this publicly. So what is the alt-right, like, or the dissident right, or whatever? Like, what are they, in what way are these guys heroes? Like digitally posting on forums and Twitter and what have you? Like,
well, there's something.
These guys are doing shit. Yeah, no, go ahead.
Yeah, and there's something inherently demoralizing and arousing of suspicion if you've got to hide behind, Turkey Fucker 3000 on a internet forum instead of just letting everybody see who you are. And probably something for our movement, although I understand and fully appreciate how difficult it is. But when it's just some weirdo who hides behind some obviously fake name, then it's inherently to the person that, I know we're not trying to, quote unquote, get everyone on our side, but we don't want people to look at us and go, oh, they're a fucking weirdo because they're using this, avatar, and, it just arouses suspicion inherently. Whereas if you go forthrightly, my name is such and such, these are sincerely held beliefs, and I do believe ultimately these are moral beliefs, and, anyone that's even in good faith marketing is going to go, well, I still think that's wrong, but I don't see you as, you know, the virgin incel weirdo on 4chan.
Okay, but I'm going to call you out here a little bit.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Keep in mind that in many ways, our beliefs are immoral and wicked. I mean, I think this is something we actually have, you have to embrace that because I think there's there's something else that we've done. Like, for instance, I use my name. I don't use a pseudonym. I think I've used a pseudonym like twice in my entire life to write like a couple of blogs that I thought were bad, actually. When I was at Talkie Mag, I wrote a few things that I thought were bad, and so I put them under another name. I read them, and I was like, oh, this is shit. I can't improve it, so I'm just going to publish it under another name. And people in the comments were like, oh, this is great. We should have more of this guy and no more Richard Spencer. But anyway, I use my name, and so I have to take responsibility. So, I mean, I can be a bit edgy and outrageous, but at the end of the day, I have to take responsibility for what I'm doing. And that's a problem. So you have to speak in a certain way, and you do have to wear a certain mask. But what I mean by saying, and so I'm not going to go out and like act immorally or say things that are awful and, you know, worthy of contempt and so on. But what I mean by immoral, and this is what I think everyone needs to be psychologically conditioned to, is that we are attempting to undermine the moral fabric of America. Like, we are doing something, and again, I'm saying this to a particular crowd. I'm not saying this publicly. Like, we aren't moral, and we aren't doing something that is ultimately like for the good of America or the world as it's currently constituted. We do want to ultimately undermine the moral system in which we live. So we are sinister, and it isn't. I guess I'm stressing this because I think people need to get morally conditioned to what needs to be done, in the sense that there's a lot of happy talk in the movement about like, we just want nationalism, and, you know, we just want to all go home again, and we're going to all be happy homelands. This is one of my least favorite memes from like Ramsey Paul or whatever. And this is all good, you know, whatever. That's not what we're about. We are on a campaign of demoralization, a vicious campaign, a campaign of revenge, you could say, a campaign that's going to undermine and demean all of the things that most people hold sacred. And I mean that very seriously. That's not something that I was going to say, but like, the world, we can't, like, I don't think we should go out there and fight every battle. I think that's something that I really learned, and so on. Like, if you're just resisting everything, you're just going to get bulldozed at some point. But what we ultimately want to accomplish is really the opposite of the current moral system. And so from the perspective of the moral system, from the perspective of real America, we are evil.
On the subject of what real America wants and how we are kind of an antithesis to the Americanist view, where do you think China fits in? Are you as skeptical of them as you are of Russia?
I'm pretty skeptical of China. Yeah. I don't, get into this kind of like anti-China posting or things like that. And I also will admit my own ignorance about China. I don't quite understand them or know what they want. And I would also say that I'm skeptical of like China's imperial or global ambitions. And again, I don't know what they want, and I don't know if China has a vision of the world outside of like Chimerica. And they do have a different vision. I mean, the state will act on its own behalf, and it will largely act on behalf of the Chinese people. And so in that sense, it is better. And I think there's a lot to be said for like its investment in infrastructure and, so on. They have bullet trains, and we have 30,000 deaths by car accident. By the way, another aspect of this GOP platform was a total antithesis to light rail and any kind of rail. So it was like, the government shall never pursue any form of like transportation outside of driving down the highway. I mean, go look at it. It is so like antithetical to the civilization that I imagine most of us want. It's crazy. But anyway,
so do you think,
I guess I'm kind of a skeptic of China. I'm not pro-China. And I think a lot of this, like, I see a huge crossover between the pro-Russia people and the pro-China people. And so I'm kind of inherently skeptical of it. But I also, I guess I admit my ignorance of China. I don't know exactly I don't know what they want exactly, or their vision for a world. I know their vision for right now, like the Chinese people, the Chinese Communist Party, and Chimerica relationship. But I don't understand, and I don't know if they have something beyond that.
It just seems like they just want to do trade, and I think they just want to surpass the U.S. slowly and patiently while the U.S. kind of decays in on itself, and they want to do. So a gentleman by the name of Crouten T has a good video about this. I forget the title of it, but I think it's China and Trump's biggest failure, where it goes into mercantilism and how China had a system of tributaries, and because before the U.S. and the rise of Europe to a lesser extent, they were the world's largest economy. And we must remember that the European powers didn't take the Americas for more land. They wanted to be closer to China so they could have that kind of commercial relationship with them.
Interesting.
So I think they just have a kind of a stagnant view of the world, where the U.S. had its day in the sun, but all roads truly lead to China, and maybe their own version of the end of history, where they tried the radical, crazy American system and the U.S. decays, and the natural thing of China being the great power is restored.
Interesting.
Yes,
I mean,
I tend to agree with that. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you were speaking first.
Yeah, shotgun. I suppose it's very pertinent here in Australia, of course, because I think the equivalent of that middle America, salt of the earth conservative view is that, China is going to invade tomorrow the northern half of the country and just take resources and whatnot, which remains to be seen. But I think probably just a general comment would be that, can anyone point to, perhaps I'm showing my ignorance, that Asians as a racial and ethnic group don't tend to have this sort of European Faust, will to conquer and expand, or so it seems. Otherwise, they would have done it. I mean, we can't sort of point back in history to where they took Australia, which they were, very much more close to than, Britain, which for God's sakes was on the other side of the world. I just don't see that they have this, quote unquote, evil intent that the sort of boomer conservative points to and goes, booga booga, they're trying to take over the world tomorrow.
May I respond?
I don't see that as well. I mean, they failed to colonize Vietnam.
Mm.
for decades.
And in World War II, Japan didn't even want to conquer Hawaii. I guess they were more interested in delivering a quick blow to the American fleet based off their strategy in 1905, where they knocked Russia's fleet out and with their own surprise attack and overtook them quickly, signed a peace treaty, and the older generals and admirals in Japan wanted to do the same thing the US. They didn't have this vision of kind of forcing their will on the United States or even going past Hawaii.
Yeah, two words to this portrayal of them. Genghis Khan. I mean, it is true, probably true on a macro level, but it's those kind of will to power ambitions are not as prevalent in the Far East as they are in the West. But certainly the Mongols and the Chinese have a great deal of Mongol DNA, as well as, and you were just talking about the Japanese Empire. The Japanese Empire was very brutal. It's impossible to deny that, even if you can point to one or two instances of mercy or whatever you would want to call it. And if you look at world history, the past 150 years where China has been relatively less powerful, it is an aberration. In China, they call it the century of humiliation between the British invasions of the early 19th century and the failure that was the programs of Mao Zedong, where they were poorer than Africa for a couple of decades. Throughout many times in human history, the Han Dynasty comes to mind. China was the most powerful area of the world. They actually had contact with the Romans, and the Romans certainly respected them. I do think that China is a force to be reckoned with, even if it can be exaggerated. And furthermore, if one is approaching this from an illiberal stance, is not the rise of an illiberal power a good thing? And despite all of Marjorie Taylor Greene's talk about how the Chi-Coms want to destroy America and implement a socialist agenda through Joe Biden and the Democrat Party, like if an illiberal power is usurping and surpassing the liberal power, i.e. the United States, then would not one with an illiberal view that as a good thing? And I'm not trying to make an argument. I mean that as a genuine inquiry.
Well, I don't. I mean, I see where you're going, but I do kind of. I don't have any kind of like inherent antagonism towards the Chinese or something, but it has to be about us and not, is it necessarily a good thing? I don't know. I've heard a lot of people who are very pro-Russia say, well, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, this is kind of like a rough draft or a experiment in an illiberal power taking on the West or whatever. And I don't know. I sense a lot of wishful thinking and kind of LARPing in statements like that. Like, I don't know if it's necessarily a good thing. It obviously can coexist with America becoming extremely liberal, and it's really what do they see in us? Like, what do they see that is this going to help us in some way? But I'm not interested in like the triumph of illiberalism around the world. I'm just simply interested in the triumph of, the future of Aryans. And so I don't know. I mean, I think it's an open question.
I never suggested that illiberalism is a goal. Certainly didn't mean to suggest that. It's just the goal that you stated. Would not illiberalism be a necessary pretext for it? It's necessary, not sufficient. It's not sufficient. It's necessary.
Well, my point about
Go ahead.
my point about China is and Japan is that those two civilizations, they only look next door. They don't have the same global looking outward that that the Western world had or still has to an extent. They simply look just towards their neighbors in a way, and they don't really have much ambition in Europe, or probably not in the Americas either, based on what I know of their history.
Yeah.
Oh, Richard, I was just going to not necessarily I agree with what you said before about, we are basically going to get up people's noses because to their eyes, we are, of course, we are the Darth Sidious already, that type of stereotype. But if Jared Taylor from, is it AMRAN, American Renaissance, went on our version of 60 Minutes a couple of years ago. He didn't necessarily do a bad job, but there was a Karen, of course, interviewing him who was just, snide and had all these, basic bitch questions of him. And I probably something that's always stuck to my mind, which goes to what you're saying, is that she sort of said to him, and I think I'm quoting it directly because there's not much more to the question. She'd said to him, "Are you a hater?" As if there was some, profundity to it. And I sort of remember thinking at the time, there actually is profundity to that, to the sort of, middle class white family, with the wine sipping mum that we were just talking about, who sort of works at the kids' tuck shop and is for inclusion and diversity, and how much power that has to it. And I understand, of course, what you're saying, but I mean, the correct response to that is, of course, and I wish, we had a time machine and we could prep Jared up, like, it is a profound love for our own people, first and foremostly. And if somebody wants to say, well, that's inherently immoral, well, that even how horrible and quite honestly how despicable most of these our Anglosphere country societies are, if we could somehow engineer that to be said, and maybe cue up like a tear to run down your eye, Richard, as you say it, I think that would truly speak. I mean, I'm not just being blasé and poetic about it. I mean, that would still speak to every conservative that I know that sort of disagrees with our explicit racialism.
Well, I think that, okay, when I might have seen this interview. I've certainly seen a lot of Jared Taylor interviews, but I imagine what she's saying is a kind of challenge in a way. It's like, what are you about other than hating on Blacks or Hispanics or something?
Yeah.
And isn't that actually a good question to ask? Because I mean, I don't know. I'm maybe not as much of a fan of Jared Taylor as you are. I mean, I think that is a good question for a lot of these groups. Like, what are you about? Like, you're talking about crime or these illegals flying across the border and so on. Like, what are you really offering that isn't just pure negativity? I think that's a question I ask myself a lot. I mean, it's a good question, and maybe it was bluntly put, but I don't know. I mean, I get what you're saying, but I feel like that kind of thing has been tried, and I just love my people. Well, do we just love our people? I mean, our people got us into this situation.
I mean, like, but flaws, it's like
flaws within us brought us to this point. And our people don't necessarily love us. And so, like, the white race isn't just behind us in the way that they are behind, like, Al Sharpton or something. The blacks are, to a very much greater extent, behind Al Sharpton than they are behind the whites are behind Jared Taylor. So it's a more difficult relationship. And I think it does raise some questions that are worth worth asking. And I understand what you're saying, and I'm not suggesting that we act in a public manner in some kind of like just vile manner and just, you know, become a Jerry Springer caricature and, you know, go up and say, you know, down with Jews on a talk show and whatever. I think that's obviously not a good thing. But like, to hate something is to want something better. It is to want to kind of overcome our current situation. And so we kind of do have to hate whites on some level. Like, we're not good enough. We got ourselves in this position. We're not getting ourselves out of it. We're doing all sorts of silly things as resistance. And we do kind of need to at least psychologically understand that among ourselves. If whether we say that publicly is debatable, but how we understand ourselves now, I don't think it should be. You know, to hate something can be pure resentment. And in that sense, I think it is very negative, just to kind of like, well, I hate all these Mexicans, you know, and these blacks are committing crime. I hate them. The Jews are in control of Wall Street. I hate them. That's pure resentment. But hating the world in the sense that we want to overcome it, we want to see something else, that is a different type of emotion. And I do think, you know, we're not in a situation, and I mean, I remember saying this actually at an Ameren conference many years ago now, like, we're not in a situation where we can just, you know, like, the white race is just being exterminated. And, you know, we're just on the gangplank and we're like, well, I love my people and I'll sacrifice for them. We're not in that situation. We're in a very different situation. And I think that kind of like, well, I just love my people thing, I'm not sure that is how we should understand ourselves. Whether we can communicate that to the public is not a bad thing. I mean, you know, I love my people, I love what we can be. And so I think there are ways of communicating that to the public, but that is PR. You know, at the end of the day, like, I do hate whites.
Don't you see an innate contradiction in hating us because we hate us?
No, the more ironic, the better, I think.
Hold on. What did you say? Hating us because we hate us? What do you mean?
Isn't that paradoxical, to hate us because we hate us?
No, well, it's not. It is paradoxical, but I think that's, we hate ourselves, and I hate that. Yeah, it is kind of a paradox. Yeah. But paradoxes are good.
I hate that. To say that I hate us because I hate us, I agree with that. You know, just another level of intricacy there. But it was purely just PR, because I mean, people might just roll their eyes at me being sort of the white collar wanker. Just look at my avatar, for God's sakes, and look at that parted hairline. You know, just screams wanker. But I mean, I just see, even if it's possible, and I think it definitely is what you're suggesting with creating this new spirituality with Mark, I wholeheartedly agree with that. But I just don't, there cannot be an outright hatred. I don't see us being successful in a wider respect if we are just hated and reviled, and if we can just, and we ought not to be, as you rightly say, like, why are we hated by people of which we have, and I say it again, just to sound so lovey-dovey and ridiculous, of which we have a profound paternal love for. And I was going to butt in before, and I don't have any children, but I know you do. I mean, it's our brethren that hate us because we advocate for our interests. I think we've got to treat them almost like a child that's cranky at dad because dad's had to, you know, smack him across the chops and say, you're not to do that, and not to take the reaction to heart, and just have a bit of a backbone about it and say, you know, one day in 2 centuries, say, I agree with your time frame, you know, they'll look back and go, wow, we were on the brink of perhaps something we ought not to entertain, but we definitely arrested it. Whatever it comes to be, I think will be benefit from us having pursued these ideas and our interests. But I think it just, in a crude sense, it's purely on a PR. I just think it's better if we try to disarm sort of the hatred and antagonism towards us. I mean, Antifa is always going to hate us because they sort of rightly see that a positive white ethnocentrism does, and you know, Jewish elites that, you know, are nefarious and despise us for who we are. I mean, I don't partake in sort of conspiracies, but definitely there's those individuals nonetheless. We can't ever change the minds of those people, but you know, that again, our stereotype of the wine sipping Karen, if we can just disarm the Karen, to coin a horrible phrase, with coming out with something which is a little bit left field. I mean, to say that we have, you know, this from a profoundly almost bleeding heart. I think, you know, conservatives accuse the leftists in your part of the world of being bleeding hearts. Am I right? And it's often sort of touted. I mean, we are the bleeding hearts. We care profoundly for people that hate us, but we do it anyway. And we're not expecting a big thank you letter in the mail this Friday. You know, we're going to do it regardless.
Yeah. I get it, but I think disarming and reframing is one of the most powerful things you can do. And maybe just saying you love the white race is not really doing that. I mean, one of the powerful thing about Jesus was his ability to reframe a question. And maybe saying, actually, I hate whites, that might disarm the Karen a little bit more.
You might be right there.
Because it's not what her mind is, it has a logic to it. It's going in a certain direction. And then you say, you disrupt that.
Yes.
It's like, I agree with you. Whites are terrible. That's why we need to change.
You actually, sorry to keep on waffling over you, but that one of our lovely colleagues here who mentioned, you know, how tattooed up and degenerate sort of that middle America is. We sort of have our equivalent of that here, of course, and they're sort of the object of hatred of many sort of white leftists, of you know, middle class white leftists. And if it's amazing how disarming it is, exactly what you're saying, when we can say, you know, we'll be taught, because I have, you know, being where I am, it's sort of very much white leftists who are economically libertarian, say, sort of that, you know, all-round liberal, small L liberal type of person. And I'll just say, ironically, out loud, you know, if there's someone like that walking down the street, maybe the left is right. Maybe all white people should die. And it's just so completely disarming to say exactly what you're saying. That, yeah, maybe all those white losers ought to die, exactly what you're actually saying.
Yeah.
I want the ones who may be innately predisposed to that to fuck off. But the rest of us, I want this for the rest of us who have the potential to see the light.
Yeah. Yeah. But we need to kind of talk to different audiences. And also, you know, there are bigger forces at play here. You know, I mean, like, I use this example during the Trump administration, like LGBTQ identification went from like 10% to 20% among Zoomers and young millennials. And so, you know, I don't know what to say. There seems to be something about our culture that kind of can't be resisted. And a lot of this does adhere to the kind of spiteful mutants concept of Dudden and others, of like, we're breeding people who are mentally ill and prone to heart disease and all sorts of things. So there are things that we kind of can't resist. And you know, I don't know, this idea that we just need to be like saving everyone, I feel is a losing prospect. And sometimes the best attitude towards this is that, like, look, these people are going to die. They're not going to reproduce, you know? Like, do we want to have a compulsory girlfriend for everyone on 4chan? You know, like that would create horrifying consequences of all of these like incel types having multiple children or so. I mean, I don't think this is going to happen, of course, but like it's a dark prospect. So I don't know. I mean, what we say to the outside world and how we analyze things, and then what we say to each other might be very different things. And it's kind of hard psychologically to talk to different audiences, but I think it is a skill that we need to learn. This all gets back to my general concept of the sinister quality of what we're up to. You know, dissembling is difficult. It's hard. It's psychologically kind of damaging even. You know, it's psychologically taxing. But you need to say things to different people. Say different things to different people. They're just different audiences that we have, and different you know, messages that we're going to convey, and how we understand what's happening might be very different than what we might want to happen. Like, it might be very good to say, I love my people, like, you know, so on. That might be the appropriate thing. But, you know, amongst ourselves, I think we should have a very different concept.
Oh, of course. Yeah, undoubtedly. Undoubtedly.
Yeah. Whew. All right, guys, I am getting a little bit sleepy. Why don't we put a bookmark in it? Do you guys, are you guys also a little bit, do you have any kind of last minute thoughts or?
I'm gonna be, are you still in the Dallas area?
No, I'm not in Dallas.
Okay, never mind then.
Okay. You're gonna be down in Dallas, I guess?
Yeah, briefly for a weekend.
Okay. No, I'll let you guys know in advance when I go down there. I'm gonna probably go down there a little more regularly.
Yeah, when you're down there, be happy to meet you.
Awesome. Yeah, that would be fun. That would be fun. Okay. Well, let's just adjourn for now, and I will post this right away. But I'm also going to post a little kind of podcast video that Ed and I made today. So there's some stuff coming. All right. Well, good talk, everyone. And I will, thanks for contributing, and I will talk to everyone soon. All right. Bye. 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 Bye.